Hi, Joy here, and I'm just going to chat to you about what makes birth work. Why is it that some women can have a really straightforward labour and birthing experience, and they may not have done much preparation, they may not be very fit, they may not appear to be that well educated about the birth process, and they can have a straightforward birth. How does that happen? And why is it that other people that have done all the preparation and apparently done everything right can end up with a less than ideal birth, in their opinion? And maybe in other people's opinions as well, but they don't matter. So I was one of these people who 31 years ago, just over 31 years ago, decided that because I was a trained nurse and a trained midwife, and I've been a midwife for, I don't know, 5 years, something like that, that I knew about birth and that I knew what you had to do to have a good birth experience. Still don't know that now, all these years later. Anyway, I read the books, I relaxed as much as I could, I connected with my baby, I tried to stay away from things that made me anxious. I didn't listen to bad birth stories. I was very positive minded. I knew I could do this. I had a great faith in birth because I wasn't going anywhere near that hospital. I was going to have a home birth, and that's what my mum had done in the 60s. She hadn't gone to hospital for her 3 babies, and one of them was a very large baby, a nice 11.5 pounder. So I wasn't imagining that I'd go anywhere near a hospital. Anyhow, the way that things happened on that evening was that my labour was really hard, and it was really long, and it was really painful, and I decided to go into hospital for an epidural. This was after about, 24 hours of labouring, and not getting very far, apparently being stuck at 6 centimetres, the classic thing if a baby's malpositioned. And my baby was malpositioned. So we didn't know this at the time. I thought I was being a wimp. I went in for an epidural, which didn't work. They thought perhaps the contractions weren't strong enough. I tell you, they were bloody strong. So I had the drip to try and make contractions stronger, which it did. It made them stronger. And I could still feel them because the epidural hadn't worked, even though it was recited. Long story short, I ended up with not a category 1 caesarean, but a very unplanned caesarean. My baby did start to go into distress after a long time when I got to 9 centimetres, and my baby was found to be in a brow position. And even still, they were very kind, and weren't going to rush me off to theatre. They were going to see if baby could move its head a bit and even be born face first. That sometimes happens with brows, and that wasn't the case for me. And baby began to show signs of distress, and I went for that much needed caesarean under general anaesthetic, because I had no faith that a spinal would work because the epidural hadn't. I just needed to be knocked out and put out of my misery at that point. And I'm not a dramatic person in any way, but I really needed to be put out of my misery instantly. And that's what the general anaesthetic did for me. Lots of downsides to that, but I'd still make the same choice. Anyway, 31 and a bit years later, I can look back and be very grateful for that birth and would not change a thing about it. Not a thing. Not one thing. Not the decision to go to hospital, not the decision to have the general anaesthetic, although I grieve the time I didn't see my baby after birth. But I was very poorly anyway, so even if I'd had a spinal, I still wouldn't have been with my baby after birth because I was unconscious for many hours. So the whole point of this is to say that I understand now, I understand why that birth unfolded as it did for my soul's journey and evolution, and for my son's journey and his future evolution. But at the time I was devastated and felt that I'd failed, my body had failed me, that I'd failed to do something right. What didn't I do? Did I do too much yoga? Did I do not enough yoga? Was it because my joints are so flexible? Perhaps that's the problem. Perhaps I ate too much sugar. Did my baby get too big and therefore got jammed? Yeah, all these things run through your mind. And yeah, I've just now come to believe and know on a very deep level that babies play a big part in what happens during birth. They move themselves. They can move. So they can move into position and out of position. And sometimes they get jammed in a position. You know, if you've had your waters broken, and they can get jammed in one position, and then they find it hard to move. They have the will and the drive to move forward. I don't know if they know why, but you know, they are born with reflexes that make them turn when something brushes their cheek. You know, and they've got the stepping reflex, and you know, all sorts of reflexes that encourage the baby to turn when it meets various landmarks in the pelvis. So babies do play an active part in their birth. And yeah, and I'm really glad that my son chose that type of birth. And you know, he still needs a hand out sometimes. He has autism. You know, he still needs a hand out, and he's very grateful when people offer help. You know, it's not always a bad pattern for a person to have. It's just their pattern, you know. So the caesarean didn't cause him to need to be helped out of anywhere. But yeah, you know, that's in his personality, that sometimes he can't do things and he does need to ask other people for help, as we all do. Sorry, there's a mosquito. Looks very professional, doesn't it? Yeah, I just didn't want to inhale it. I think it's gone. Yeah. So what I want to tell people that are pregnant is that it's not all on you. You know, it is important, you know, it is important to find out about birth so you know about the process, so it's not so scary. It is important to get the right birth supporters with you so that you feel supported and able to relax and able to let the hormone of love, you know, oxytocin, flow around your system. It is important to write birth plans, even though you know that birth isn't going to go to plan, but it means that you can look at all the different components. And even if you didn't plan an unplanned caesarean under general anaesthetic, you have a plan for that, just in case that's the way your birth unfolds. Yeah, and there's medicine in every birth story. And I can't imagine what I would have been like if I'd had that ecstatic home birth, you know, for my first baby, and it had all been quick and it had all been easy, because my second baby was like that. So my VBAC, my vaginal birth after caesarean, was like that. I had my first contraction at 8 o'clock and it was getting a bit intense, so we went to the hospital because they didn't do VBACs at home on the NHS 28 years ago, not in my area. So we went to hospital and I got there and I was pushing, and I pushed him out by 11:45, you know, what's that, 3 3/4 hours. And I said, goodness, I could do that again before tea time. And I was kissing everyone and I was high as a kite. But that did a lot of reparative, restorative work, redemptive work on my previous birth experience and what I thought of myself as a woman and my capability to give birth or not. it didn't inform me in the same way that the first birth did. The first birth taught me how strong I am and how much I can endure, and how, I don't give up. I do keep trying, and and just that there's something bigger than us, and beyond us, and a greater plan that we're all part of. And if we're lucky, it all becomes clear with time. And that's what I think has happened in my case, that I wouldn't have had the depth of experience. I would have had a different experience, and it would have been lovely, and it would have been so much nicer than my first birth. But in retrospect, after 3 decades, I wouldn't change a thing, not a thing. So there are things you can do to optimise your chances of straightforward birth, vaginal birth, physiological birth, whatever you want to call it. Normal birth, it used to be called. Now, interventions and surgery are the norm, aren't they? Yeah, so there are things that you can do. As I said, you prepare yourself, you prepare your body, you prepare your mind, you prepare your spirit, you open yourself up to what is, you deal with your unresolved stuff as much as you can, because if not, that'll come up and bite you on the arse in labour. If you've got problems in your relationship, problems with your mother who might be there with you, problems from abuse, in your past, if you don't address it some way and acknowledge it when you're pregnant, it can arise in labour, when all your defences fall down and you're very vulnerable, and then it shows up. And that's not a nice time for it to show up. Although it's great, it all goes in the great crucible where it can be changed, transformed, transmuted into something else. But it's not always a nice experience for you. Yeah. So, if you are pregnant, my advice is to gather people around you who know about birth and can walk with you on the journey to birth. Learn all you can about birth. Learn about the bits that you really don't want to learn about. I didn't look into having a caesarean at all when I planned my home birth. I wish I had, because if I'd have written that caesarean plan, I still would have had choices. Perhaps my baby could have been skin to skin with my partner, or perhaps the cord didn't need to be cut straight away, or perhaps someone could have taken photos of my baby, everything that happened to my baby in that time when I was unconscious. Yeah, that's the bit that's still there 31 years later, the lost time, what happened. But if you don't look into these things, if you don't investigate them, if you don't write a plan, then your choices are limited. And I think that's all I want to say. But giving birth isn't a mindset, and it isn't to do with how fit you are. A lot of it is out of our control, but we can optimise our chances of having a positive birth experience. So I hope that was useful. Okay, bye.